audiences internationally and nationally. And I'll start by saying that in many ways, Mumia's case is a microcosm of what's wrong with the criminal justice system in the United States. So all of the violations in his case, and there are many, but we can categorize them as tampering with evidence on the part of the police to obtain a conviction, the racism on the part of the judge who was overheard saying, "I'm going to help them fry the nigger," the exclusion of black jurors, the suppression of exculpatory evidence by the DA. For example, that there was a fourth person present at the crime scene, and that fact was suppressed at trial by the prosecutor, and that person is believed by many to have shot the police officer that Mumia is accused of killing. And I think those are the major ones. So all of those violations are not particular to Mumia's case, but they're responsible largely for the rise of mass incarceration in the United States. And they are violations in hundreds of thousands of other cases. And ultimately, because Mumia's case is known internationally, if there is a break in the case of Mumia, it is going to have a profound impact on the legitimacy of the criminal justice system. So that's really what's at stake in the defense of Mumia at this point. And this is an important moment because there are critiques of mass incarceration already. And the kind of nasty vindictiveness and attempt to criminalize an innocent man, the exposure of that, not just an innocent man, but a black radio journalist, a former Black Panther, a public intellectual, the voice of the voiceless, that exposure of how the police and the judges and the prosecutors and politicians have colluded to keep this man in prison would create a huge scandal and would deal a tremendous blow to the broader system of mass incarceration, but also the death penalty. I don't know if you know that there was an execution here recently of a man by the name of Nathaniel Woods.
Yeah.
And the person who killed the police officers that he was accused of killing literally said, "I did it," and he had nothing to do with it. And there was evidence of this, and the execution continued. Okay, so there's a tremendous opening in this case. And that opening is made possible, or was made possible, by a Supreme Court decision in 2016. That Supreme Court decision is known as Williams versus Pennsylvania. The reason why that decision is important is because, ironically, it was the first Supreme Court decision that established the parameters of judicial bias in the United States. So the parameters of judicial bias had been hazy, not clearly laid out by the law. But this decision essentially established that you can't be both prosecutor and judge in the same case. And that if you've been involved in a significant decision in the prosecution of a case, if you later become a judge, you have to recuse yourself from that case. So in Williams versus Pennsylvania, the defendant, Williams, alleged that a Pennsylvania judge by the name of Ronald Castile was biased because he had prosecuted his case, and that this judge who was overseeing Williams's appeals should have recused himself. Williams won. And so this allowed many prisoners in Pennsylvania, including Mumia, to go to court and litigate what is known as a Williams case, that this also happened to me. What is so important to know is that the same judge involved in the Williams case was the same judge involved in Mumia's case, Judge Ronald Castile. He had been a prosecutor, not just a prosecutor, but the elected DA of Philadelphia. He prosecuted Mumia's case, and then he became a judge of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is the courts that review appeals. And as a judge, he denied Mumia's right to an appeal. What we should know about Ronald Castile is that he was given campaign funds by the Fraternal Order of Police, which is the main organization that has tried over many, many years first to execute Mumia and then to keep him in prison. So the Fraternal Order of Police gave the judge funds to campaign, because in Pennsylvania, judges are elected. So they're politicians. But also, the Fraternal Order of Police named Ronald Castile Man of the Year. And in fact, our attorneys in the 1990s, when Mumia was about to present his appeals to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they asked Ronald Castile to recuse himself. But Ronald Castile said, I'm not going to recuse myself because you are accusing me of being biased because I've been funded by the Fraternal Order of Police. And the reason why I'm not going to recuse myself is because the other 7 judges in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court were also funded by the Fraternal Order of Police. And he named their names. So of course, this is a huge opening in Mumia's case. We went to court. The Williams claim was litigated in the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas, and the judge who heard arguments on the bias of this judge was Leon Tucker, a black judge, interestingly enough, one of the few judges in Pennsylvania who has not been funded by the Fraternal Order of Police. And because of a series of, I think, pressures and events, including the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, we won. We won in court. So this was huge. This happened over the course of 2 years. This was in the news. There were demonstrations. We packed the court. In the last hearing of the court, where the Williams claim was heard by Leon Tucker, all of the original people involved in putting Mumia away and sentencing him to the death penalty, essentially, they all showed up. So the original prosecutor in the case, Joe McGill, showed up to court. The widow of the of the fallen police officer was in court. One of the police officers who lied in court in the original trial and said that Mumia had that he had said to him that he killed Officer Faulkner. His name is Watschel. The name of the police officer, Officer Watschel. He was in court, and the courtroom was packed with police officers. During that last trial, the widow burst out and said something that no one could hear, but she got up and she complained, and she was escorted out of the court because the judge ordered her removal because she was essentially wilding out. And what this meant essentially was that the police, the original prosecutor, the widow, they were very, very nervous because up until then, we had been winning. And so what they tried to do was to send a message to the judge that he should be careful about the decision he made. But the judge essentially sided with us. We proved our case. And for the first time in the history of Pennsylvania, the courts granted Mumia a claim that was proved in court according to precedent. Okay, so what this would mean that we won is that all of Mumia's appeals claiming wrongdoing on the part of the prosecutor, problems with the key witnesses and the ways in which they were coerced at trial to finger Mumia, to identify Mumia as the killer. Issues like discrimination in jury selection, that black jurors were excluded from the jury, all of these issues that had not been heard by the appellate court would be reopened and allowed to be studied and reviewed by the court system. Huge. And if Mumia wins on any of these issues, he would get a new trial. So this is huge. We have not had an opening like this in a long time. So what has happened most recently is that the widow in the case, Maureen Faulkner, who's essentially been supported by the Fraternal Order of Police for the last 38 years since Mumia has been in prison, literally financially supported, and they bring her out whenever there's an issue in the case, and she is the darling of the Philadelphia media. She filed a very rare request to the Pennsylvania Superior Court requesting that she be allowed to be a party in the case alongside of the DA who's going to be arguing against Mumia in this appellate process. The Superior Court said this is very irregular and no courtroom allows the so-called victim of a crime to be a representative in or a party in the trial. And so it was denied. So what she did was that she hired a lawyer who then studied the law in Pennsylvania and looked for a loophole. And in Pennsylvania and in 11 other states in the United States, there is something called the King's Bench petition. So this is a very rare petition, hardly ever used in the court system, which asks the highest court in the state to intervene in a situation where public interest is at stake, and when the issue that the claimant is presenting will not have a hearing in the current phase of a case in the courts. So she essentially has asked the Pennsylvania Supreme Court through a King's Bench petition to intervene to remove the current DA who is prosecuting the case, because according to her, the DA is biased and has a conflict of interest and is colluding with Mumia's attorneys. And so that was a petition that was presented to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and nobody thought that this petition was going to get any legitimate hearing. But what has happened in the last month or two is that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the same court where Ronald Castile was sitting, the same court that housed a biased judge and judges funded by the Fraternal Order of Police, who denied Mumia's right to appeals, not just Mumia's right to appeals, but the right to appeals of many other defendants in Pennsylvania. The same court that is being accused of being biased is now accepting this petition on the part of Maureen Faulkner, and has